Okay, so we're back. So what we need to do, we have this form. I can go to Add Department, I can click my Save button, my validation checks run. If I put in negatives. But when I click the Save button, nothing happens, right? So we need to write the code when the user clicks Save. We need to connect to the database. We need to create a new department, fill the name from our name box, fill the budget from the budget box, add that record to the database, and then we want to redirect the user over here, and we should be able to see the new department in our list. So we need to add about 5 or 6 lines of code. I'm going to just look at the code we wrote last week. So this is the code that populates our grid. So this is what we did to connect to the database. We used our default connection in our web.config, and we connected. In order to get this to work, to be able to use our database connection, which lives here in our web.config file, in order to use that, we had to make one reference at the top. This is where our database connection is talking to Entity Framework. So we're going to need to add this reference on any page that uses the database. So up at the top of our department details page, we're going to add, so we're going to reference database model so we can connect to SQL Server. So the using command allows us to link in or connect to another library, and it's the name of our project dot models. So last week it said lesson 8, but when I exported that as a template and create a new project, Visual Studio automatically updates all those references to lesson 9, because that's what my new project is called. So without this reference, we're not going to be able to see or talk to our database.
So if you don't have that in, you'll get an error or nothing will show up?
Good question. Okay. I'll leave it out and we'll see the difference. Thanks for asking that. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is connect. So when I type using, so what we want to create is a new connection, and our connection is called default connection. Notice when I type DEF, I get no code prompt that says default connection. It doesn't recognize that database connection. If I re-enable that reference to my model folder, whoops, and keep in mind what's in here. So here's models. This is where all of our database entity framework stuff is generated. When I put in my using this time, if I start typing DEF, notice with that reference, I now get default connection as one of the options. So that reference is what allows our page to see the database connection.
What if you go to the browser, like try and do it through the browser, refresh it if you don't have the using
Well, I won't even be able to compile it. So if I type the code, so let's say I do this, okay? So here's the line of code we need. I'm going to create a connection called DB and say new default connection. And then I put in a set of curly braces. So the using statement basically means connect here, and when this curly brace ends, it automatically disconnects. It destroys my connection. Notice it says default connection can't be found. If I try to compile, we get Visual Studio says, hey, wait a minute, we don't know what default connection means. If it lives somewhere in the project, you haven't made the reference to it in order for us to be able to use it. So as soon as I uncomment this reference and re-enable that line, as soon as I do that, my red lines go away and I can rebuild. So you actually won't be able to run it if you add that code. So what we want to do is create a new department in memory. So I'm going to create a department. I'll call it OBJ. Actually, I'll just give it a short form, dep. So it's just a variable. We're creating a new department. Equals new db dot, oops. Equals new, sorry, department. So we're creating a new department. So we have a new department object, but all of the properties are blank. Fill the properties of the new department. So we have this variable called DEP, that's a new department. And because this variable is of type department, we have all of the properties. So what properties do we need to set when we're adding a new department? Yep, we'll want to set the name. How do we get the name? What object, remember, we're talking about objects, what object on our page has the new name? Yeah, our text box. I could read your lips, Albert. So we'll use txt name dot, and what property of the text box do we want to access? That'll tell us the value typed by the user. Yeah, the dot text property. So that'll populate the text box value into the name. What else do we need to set? Yep, we'll need to set the budget from our budget text box. Now, what does this mean? We're getting a red line under the budget, but we didn't get any problem with the text. Why? What does this little message in gray, this code hint, tell us? Right, so budget, if I mouse over budget, it tells me it's expecting a value of a decimal type, whereas text is always considered a string. So what will we need to do in order to fill the budget property if it's expecting a decimal? Right, we'll have to convert the text to a decimal. We've done this before in class when we did our calculator, little tip calculator. So we'll convert dot to decimal the budget. So even though the user will type a numeric value, Visual Studio considers it a string because the property is called text. So we have to convert that into a numeric data type. So then we'll save the new department. So we'll reference our list of departments, and it has a built-in method called add. So when we call the add function, it's saying, okay, where's the department you want to add? So we'll just pass in our department variable. So we're going to create a new one, fill the name, fill the budget, and add it onto the existing collection of departments. And then to make any changes to a database using Entity Framework, we call database.saveChanges. We always call this if we're adding, updating, or deleting any change to the database. We have to call save changes. Once this line runs, our new department is actually in the SQL Server database. But this is what actually executes the command to save. And the last thing we want to do is redirect to the departments list page. The command for this in C# is much more explicit than it is in PHP, where we have this wonky header location function. In ASP.NET, we use response.redirect, which makes a lot more sense to me. What's the URL we want to redirect to? We want to redirect to departments.aspx. So we're creating a new blank department. It's like a mold. right? We talked about objects back in week 2 or 3. So we create a new department object like a mold, and every department has a name property and a budget property. We're going to fill the values from our 2 text boxes into those 2 respective properties. We'll add the new department and call save. And then our connection automatically drops. When we have that using statement, our connection opens here and it automatically disconnects there. So we can compile our solution. It should hopefully build. Now we should be able to put valid data in our form and try to submit a new department. Let's see what happens. So you can load your department page in the browser. I'm going to add a new department. I've already checked my validation. I already know that it works. So let's see, what kind of department can we put in here?
Computer studies.
I think I already have that in mind. Oh, let's just put in web. Budget?
$1 million.
Sure, I like that. Web gets a budget of $1 million. So we got no errors, and now if I jump to the last page in my grid, there we go. There's our new department. And maybe we'll add another one. Dentistry, they get less money. We'll save that. So the code for adding new records, this part, the only thing that will change is what model are we adding to? Is it a department, a student, a course? We'll just change that. The properties will change depending on what we're adding. If it's a student, we have a first name, a last name, and an enrollment date. If it's a course, we have a title and a number of credits and a department. Then we add our new object to our collection of that same type. We call save changes. Now the code for editing, later we're going to do editing through this same button, right? So if our form's blank, we'll add. And if we're editing an existing record, all of this code will be the same except this line will come out. And we just have to populate which property will we populate if we're editing. We're still going to populate name and budget like we did on lines 29 and 30. But we'll have to populate one other property of the department if we want to edit an existing record. Right, we'll have to set the department ID, and then when we call save changes, Entity Framework is actually smart enough to know if we give it an ID and we don't call add, it will try and do an update. So our code will be able to use almost everything we have here for updating. We'll just basically write an if statement in this save click. If we have an ID, we'll fill it, and we won't call, and otherwise we'll call add instead. And then save will know whether to do an insert or update. So we'll do that before the end of class today. Gotta go to work? Okay, files will be the link will be on Blackboard to GitHub. Anybody have any questions about what we're doing here? Seems fairly straightforward. I find doing this compared to what we have to do in PHP, it's much more lightweight and the code is a little bit cleaner. Really, the confusing part for some of you may just be getting your head around the idea of using these models, because we used Entity Framework to automatically generate them out of our database. So we sort of let the models do the work for us. All we're doing is accessing the different properties in our model and calling save. Okay. So we're going to leave this page for now. What I want to do is now add a delete functionality to our grid. Delete's fairly simple using a grid. There's really only one semi-complicated line of code, but that's fairly simple, and Visual Studio will build a lot of the functionality for us. Okay. So we'll enable delete, which shouldn't take us long. We should be able to get that working before we take a break, and that'll give us an hour to implement update. Okay, we don't need a separate page for update. We're going to do update. So we'll add delete, and once delete's working, we'll add edit links so we can go in here and edit and make changes through here. So we're going to leave and go back to our departments page because we want to add some more code to our grid. We want to add a delete link. We want to add a little Jquery confirmation, and then we'll add the code to do the deletion right from the grid. So there are some more properties we're going to set in our ASP grid view tag. What properties do we want to set? We want to create an on-row deleting. If I start typing, I can just choose on-row deleting from this little menu. So I just type on-row and equals. We're going to create a new event. So again, Visual Studio will write the function in our C# for how we process a delete. So I'll just choose create new event, and you can see a little star here that code's been added to my C#. Here's my row deleting. So this is where we'll put the server-side code to do the delete. We also need to add a column for this, but instead of a bound field just shows a column from the database. We don't want to show a value from the database, we just want a delete link. So in this time, I'm going to add an ASP, it's called an ASP Command Field, meaning it's just going to be a function that's run from here. So in here we want to set, there's a property called show delete button. So let's add show delete button equals true. Our text, whoops. The delete text property, so we can make it say remove, delete. We'll just put in the word delete. Our header text will say delete as well. So this will create a fourth column with a bunch of links that say delete. And when we click one of those links, the grid ASP automatically wires it up to this row deleting function. We don't have to make the connection, Visual Studio does it for us by saying show delete equals true and adding this row deleting function. So I'll just save and build. We'll see what it looks like. It won't do the delete yet because we haven't added the C# code. We'll need to add about 4 or 5 lines in our C# to get the delete to actually run. But that's the user interface, that's the front end part of it. I'm just going to check mine to make sure it looks correct. So we get this, it automatically generates them as links. If you want to make them buttons instead of links, there's a property you can set in here. You can set the button type property to a button, an image, or a link. The default is link. So if I leave that property out, it generates them as a link. So if you want to use a little trash can icon, you would set button type equals image, and then you could set that. I'm just going to use the default, oops, type, which is a link. We'll get this to work And then we better add a confirmation to it as well. And whenever we add these to the grids, basically it's this exact code. Add the command field and add the row deleting event. So there's all the HTML we need. So we need to go into our C# and we need to deal with this row deleting. Because right now I can click it, but it reloads the page, but nothing happens. Because our row deleting is blank. So the first thing we need to do, there is one other thing we'll have to set up. We'll have to identify what value are we going to need. We'll need one value before we can do a delete. What value are we going to need? Yeah, we'll need to know the ID of the department we want. Okay. So identify the department ID to be deleted. So there is one thing in our grid we may still need. Yeah, we do. I'm going to add one more property. Our grids can actually allow us to use one or more columns as a key. I've never really used more than one, but we can specify more than one. So in our grid, and the last thing I'm going to add here is a property called data key name. It's got names because we can have multiples. So we want to set department ID as the key column. What this means is when the user clicks on any row in the grid, ASP.NET can read the key field and tell us what the department ID is, which is useful because we're going to need that value in order to get rid of whatever department the user clicked on. We don't care what row position it's in, we need the ID number. Right? Because our department IDs, we don't actually even see them, but Visual Studio can trap them with the data key name, right? We made our department ID column false. I don't even know what we used for IDs. Okay, so I did start them at 1. We could have incremented them higher, but they start at 1. So we're going to create an integer variable called department ID. So here's what we have to figure out. Here's how we get it. This is the one line of code that's complicated. The rest of it's straightforward. We need to know which row the user clicked, right? And from the row the user clicked, we can then use this department ID key to get the ID value, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But then, so we have to figure out what row was clicked, then we have to find the matching ID in that row, and ASP.NET treats all of these as strings. So then the third thing we have to do is convert it to an integer. We need to do all 3 of those things basically in one line, and that'll give us the department ID. Then we can use that ID to do the delete part. The delete part's easy. So the first thing, here's how we get it. So we'll refer to our grid departments, dot data keys. So what's the key column? So the first thing it wants to know is, okay, what row are we looking for? How do we find out what row the user clicked? ASP.NET has a built-in way of doing it. Notice here in the row deleting, it says event arguments, E. Okay. E will tell us which row the user clicked. Notice the status bar. When I mouse over the first delete link down here at the bottom, it says delete 0, meaning that's the first row that's displayed. If I roll over to the second, it says delete 1. So that's the index of the row. So if we type e.rowIndex, that will tell us what row the user clicked on. That's built into Visual Studio. We don't have to code it. So this will give us the row number. And then we need the value So dot values, and this is where we specify department ID. So go to this row the user clicked on and get the key called department ID. And Visual Studio is complaining because we've only done 2 of the 3 things I outlined. We still have to do one more thing with that value. We got to convert it to an integer because it gets treated like a string. Actually, it's not a string, it says object. It doesn't know what type of data that key is. So we have to convert it. I know this is a very messy line of code. Messy, but functional. So again, go to the row the user clicked on, get the key called department ID, and convert it to an integer. From the row the user selected. We could break this up into a few lines of code if we wanted to. We could first get it as an object and then convert it to an integer on another line. More efficient this way. Now the rest of the code, once we know what ID we're deleting, our code is very similar to adding. We're going to create a new department object in memory. We're going to set the ID. And then instead of departments.add, what do you think what function will we call that's built into Entity Framework? Yeah, we'll call .remove and .save changes. So our code for adding and edit and deleting are pretty similar. So we need to connect to the database. So we're using our default connection. So let's create a new connection. So the same way we've connected here and here, just like in PHP, the connection's pretty standard. No matter what kind of operation we're doing, we connect the same way. Again, just like on our save, we'll create a new department in memory. We don't need to set the name and budget this time. We only need to set so we'll set our department ID value equal to what? How do we know which department we want to get the user wanted to get rid of? Even simpler. Yeah, we're just going to use this. We already identified it on this first convoluted line. This tells us the ID number of the department the user picked. So we'll just set that equal to our local department ID variable. Oh, actually, sorry, I don't want to do it that way. Sorry, we'll need to tweak this. Equals. We have to write a query from D and DB dot. We're going to do our lookup this way with a where clause. So this is a little bit of a funky syntax. When we're doing a lookup with the where clause, we use double equals. I'll explain what all this means. So this is the equivalent of doing an SQL command that says select star from departments where department ID equals our variable. So this is like a shorthand syntax, but it uses double equals just like C# does when we're or PHP when we're comparing two values. We have two options here. We only want to select one record. So we can choose select the first record that matches For best practice, we tend to use first or default. First or default means if no match is found, don't crash, basically. .first will give us an error. So this selects the department into memory with the right ID. So we're selecting the current department based on the ID. And then we call db.departments.remove, and we'll remove this department, and then we'll save our changes. So we'll use the ID to look up that record. We remove that record from the list, and we commit those changes to the database. So it's a slightly different process than if we were doing this procedurally in PHP. We'll use this same syntax when we're editing. We'll have a department ID. We'll want to query the database to look up the other fields in that department, and then we'll put the values in our form so the user can change them. So this should get rid of the department. We need to do one other thing after we remove that record. So I'm here, I click delete beside the dentistry program. What should happen after this record gets removed from the SQL server? Yeah, the grid should reload and we should see that that record got removed. So we already have a function here that populates the grid. We already have a get departments. So we can refresh the grid by calling our get method. So then we should see does it look like oh. We will want to add a Jquery confirmation, and there is one other thing on here I think we'll need to tweak. Actually, we better do this now. We talked about this back in week 1, and I think there was questions. I gave you questions about this on the exam. So when our page loads, it fills our grid. When the user clicks delete, it's going to run this function. But page load is also going to run. Which one will run first? The page load or our delete function?
What do you mean when we click?
When you click delete and it calls this method, page load will also run, right? Because our page is going to get reloaded. Which is going to happen first? This code or this code? Page load always happens first. And what happens on page load? Well, we fill our grid every time. We don't need to do this every time, right? Because our grid in ASP.NET, our grid persists. So we're wasting effort to fill the grid, delete a record, and refill it. So what could we do so the grid only fills when the user first loads the page? If they're deleting a record, we're not going to repopulate it until after we've removed our record. When we can try and run it like this, it may work, but it will be more efficient. I guess we'll run it like this. We'll come back to this point. So I'm just going to compile it. I guess I already have. So now I'm going to go and try and delete. What I want you to do is add a couple of test departments. Don't delete the ones I've given you, because they have some related data which we want to keep. So let's add a new department. I'll just call it test. Give it a budget of 1, and we'll save it. Then I'll go to the end of my list on my grid. Here's my test. We'll try and delete and see what happens. So if I delete, okay, so now I'm back to 5 pages. my test department is gone, which is good. I guess we can leave our code that way. To make it the most efficient, you don't have to do this. What I would suggest is we only need to populate our grid when on page load if the page is loading for the first time. If the user's triggering a form submission and clicking that delete link actually does a form submit, we don't need to do this. We'll process the delete first, and then we'll reload our grid after. So you can leave the code if you like, as you have it. I'm just going to wrap this in a little condition. I'm going to say if something so the condition I'm going to say is if not is post back. Whoops, that should be a capital I. It's camel case. So basically, if the page is being loaded for the first time, populate the grid. But if the page is being reloaded, we don't need to populate the grid on page load. We'll populate it after the user's deleted something. It still works okay without that if condition. We're just kind of wasting resources because we're loading the grid twice on the same load of the page. So it just saves us a little bit of overhead. Will work fine if we don't. We should also, so I'm just going to rebuild that. I'm going to add my test department back in because we want to add a confirmation to this. I think I've put a little script on Blackboard for you for this. If I haven't, I'll throw one up there, and in a minute you can copy and paste it. And we'll also need to enable link. We'll need to put a link to Jquery on. We can use Jquery for this. So I'm just going to go back. I'm going to add my test department back in. I'll add two of them, test and test 2. So now I have 2 testing departments we can use. I'm not sure if I put the script for you to delete on Blackboard. If not, I will throw it up there in just a quick second and we can grab it. Yeah, I just need to copy it. Just give me a second. I guess I don't have an active lesson 9 folder, so I'll build that right now. So lesson 9 will be create, delete, update. Okay. So if you go into course documents now, I'll move the lesson 9 folder up so it's easier to find. If you click into lesson 9, create, update, and delete, here's a little Jquery confirmation. You can just copy that code. Where would it make the most sense to put this? Yeah, let's put it on the master page. Here's what it does. So when the document loads, it finds all anchor tags, any links, and if the text of the link says delete, it will attach, on the click function, it'll attach this little confirmation box. Similar basically to what we did in PHP. We didn't use Jquery for it. We're using jQuery. So by putting it, Kaylee, why would you suggest we put it on the master page? I think it's a good idea.
First thing not load, so that, like, so it returns.
Yeah, that's one reason. It'll load faster. Why else would be a good idea? We could put it right on our departments page. What would be the added benefit of putting it on the master page instead?
If you have other pages.
Yeah, because for your lab, you're going to build out the students page with the student grid. So this way, any link that says delete, automatically it'll attach. So I'm going to copy that script. And I don't know if we have a jQuery link on our master page. I'm going to open up site.master. Yeah, we already have the link to jQuery. So this just needs to go below. So I'm just going to put this on my site.master right below the existing two script links. And because it's on the master, automatically now any link on the page that says delete will work. Now, one small thing which I realized when I did this in my other class, a couple people didn't like the delete as a link, so they changed it to a button. But the jQuery is looking for a link. So if you made your link style button, you'll have to change this from an A to an input, right? Because it will look for any input element where the text is delete. So that's a bit of a gotcha if you're using buttons rather than links.
Make the link look like a button.
You could do that as well. Sure. You could give it a class. So I'm just going to save that, and that should automatically give us a delete confirmation now. So I don't have to recompile or anything. If I just refresh my departments page now and click on a department, we should get that jQuery confirmation. If I click cancel, nothing happens. And if I click OK, delete will run. So we really only need that script one time in the project. Now that you've added it, so long as it's on the master page, it's going to run. If you call your text, your link, if you put in remove, it won't work because the jQuery is looking for a link that has the text delete. Okay, or if you used all caps, you'll have to modify the jQuery so it's looking for delete links with text in all caps. So doing delete in your lab will be pretty much the same as this, except you're going to be using a student ID in your student model instead of the department ID in the department model. So we're 3/4 of the way there. We've read a list, we've created a new record, we can delete a record using Entity Framework. So the last piece we need to be able to do is we need to have edit links in our grid. So when the user clicks edit, it will load the details page, but obviously we want to pre-fill the name and budget. And if they click save instead of adding a new record, we want to be able to let them modify the department that they've looked up. So why don't we take a pause here for 10 minutes, and when we come back, step 1 will be to create the edit links, and then step 2 will be to add code here. So when this page loads, we're going to need to check, are we adding or are we editing? If we're adding, we give the user a blank page. If we're editing, we're going to have to look up that record so we can pre-populate the form. And then same thing on our save button. We're going to need to check, are we adding a new record or editing? You can create, when we did this in PHP sometimes, actually no, I think we did it the same. We used one form, and our save page had both an insert and an update. So we're going to do it the same way here. Okay, let's take 10 minutes, we'll come back, we'll do the edit.